don't they?
Okay, we'll make a start. We'll probably get a few stragglers, so I'll keep my eyes open. I think there's a lot of people away at the moment. There were about 25 people that watched the recording of not last week, 2 weeks ago's shir. So although we don't see them live, there's quite a lot of people following the Gemarah, which is good. So we are holding on, the beginning of 14a, but I'm going to go back a little bit to 13b, and I'll put it on the screen now. You should have that now, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, so we were talking about smicha, and at the end of the last shiur, for those of you who remember, we went through all the different titles that you can have, and all the little things you get at the end of your name, a shlita, and a nun yud, and an amush, and all those different things. And we got onto that because we were talking about something which maybe you'd not noticed, and that is that some people are called Rabbi Yehuda, and some people are called Rav. So Rabbi Yehuda and Rav Yehuda are not the same person. Rav was the title given to somebody who got their ordination outside of Eretz Yisrael, and Rabbi was the title given if you got your smicha inside Eretz Yisrael. And then there was a third title, Rabban, as in Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, and that was the title reserved for the Nasi, for the president of the Sanhedrin, the head of the Sanhedrin. We were talking, thank you, we were talking about the idea of smicha, and whether the question was asked in the Gemarah, whether we really leaned on them doing literal smicha, and the answer was no. What you do is you're just called Rebbe, you're given a title, and it's announced publicly, or it's a certificate or what have you, which is placed in a prominent position. And that thereby, this is important, thereby over here on the Gemarah here, they were thereby given permission to adjudicate cases involving the laws of fines. And so the Gemarah then said, is it true that we need 3 people? This is where we started from. We said we needed 3 people to do smicha. And so the Gemarah asks the question, is that true? V'chad lo samich. Is it not the case that one person alone can ordain other rabbis? And they bring a proof. V'ha amar Rav Yehuda amar Rav. Rav Yehuda says in the name of Rav, Bram. Indeed, Zachor oto ha'ish latov. Remember, we spoke about Zachor latov last week. Johnny remembered that it was in benching. Zachor latov. We remember him for good. Who do we remember for good? This person called Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. She'il malehu. Were it not for him, nishtakhu dinei knasot mi Yisrael. You can see that word nishtakhu. You can see in the middle of that shachach. What does shachach mean?
Forget.
Again, Leon?
Forget.
Forget, correct. Nishtakhu is the passive form. So if it were not for him, nishtakhu dinei knasot misrael, the laws of fines would have been forgotten in Israel. Why would they have been forgotten? They would have been forgotten because, they would have been forgotten because only an ordained rabbi was allowed to deal with cases involving fines. We've just said that over here. Once you're called rabbi, then you can adjudicate cases involving fines. So what was it that Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava did in order to prevent the laws of fines being forgotten? So we'll see that in a minute. The Gemara says, Nishtakhu, would they really have been forgotten? Nigrosinhu. So let them study them and then they wouldn't forget them. How could they be forgotten? Ella, rather, and now we're over the page. Batlu dinei knasot Misrael. What he meant to say was the laws of fines in Israel would have been cancelled if it were not for this Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. So before we go on and see what Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava did, let's just see who he was. Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava was one of the Tanaim who lived in the 2nd century CE, time of the Romans. And he was, I think David mentioned this last time, he was one of the 10 martyrs that we read about on Tisha B'Av and also in Yom Kippur. There is a piyut, a poem that we read in Yom Kippur, on Yom Kippur. I've got it here in front of me in the Machzor. It comes in the repetition of Musaf, right in the middle of the repetition of the Shmona Esra of Musaf, right in the boring bit when you're knackered and you're feeling a bit hungry and you're getting a bit weary. And along comes this piyut. And there's no singing in this bit. There's no, there's no songs like, Mare Cohen or Hashem Hashem that you can get yourself going. This is just an account of the murder of the 10 martyrs. And in fact, in most places I've ever been to, it's just said quietly to oneself. The Chazan doesn't actually say it out loud. And of course, that means that nobody usually reads it. But actually, if you do read it, and you read the English, it's really quite an unpleasant, well, it's a very unpleasant thing. One wonders why it's in the Yom Kippur Musaf, right in the middle of that, where it's the holiest day. We understand why it's on Tisha B'Av, because it's connected to the destruction of the temple. But one wonders why it's actually in the Yom Kippur davening. And the art scroll suggests the following reason. This piyut was composed by an otherwise unknown Paitan whose signature, Yehuda Chazak, Yehuda may he be strong, follows the alphabetical acrostic. It is inserted before Zechor Rachamecha. The next bit is the bit where we ask God to remember his mercy. And shortly after that, we say Shema Koleinu. We open the ark and we say Shema Koleinu. So it's quite a highlight. So it's inserted just before that, because it is here that we beg God to recall his covenant with the patriarchs and to be merciful to their descendants, even if those descendants are undeserving. I don't actually understand how that explains why it's there. That seems to be a non sequitur to me, but that's what the art scroll says. Why Eila Ezkara, these I will remember, including Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, who is actually the last of the 10 to be mentioned in there, including him is mentioned. And just to tell you what it says about him, it says, O living one, crush their haughtiness. This is talking about the Romans in the conflagration of the time to come. for they have agreed to murder 10 righteous men, including Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. We have erred our rock, forgive us our molder. So that's Rabbi Yehuda. That's who he was, and when he lived. Now, what he was responsible for a number of innovations. He was quite a reformer, with a capital, not with a capital R, I mean, with a small r. And one of the most important halachot that Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava brought in was that if there is a case, and this is relevant to today, very relevant to today, that in a case of an aguna, a woman who is chained to her husband, normally we need 2 witnesses to testify to the death of a husband to free a woman as being a widow. Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava instituted that one witness witnessing the death of a husband is sufficient to unchain a woman. And that was really quite an innovative and revolutionary step instituted by Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, and that was probably his most famous contribution to halacha. He's mentioned quite a few times in the Gemarah, and most famously here in our Gemarah. So that's who he is and what he did. And what's he got to do with the laws of fines? Because we've just said that if it weren't for him, the whole business of fines in Israel would have either been forgotten or have gone into disuse. So let's have a look. Shepam achat, it occurred once. Gazra malchut harasha shmad al Yisrael, that the wicked kingdom decreed religious persecution against Israel. And that word shmad there, David Marks pointed out last time that word shmad is not to be found in the Vilna Shas. Those of you who are looking in an art scroll or in any other copy of the Vilna Shas, what I call the big boys Gemara, you will not find that word shmad. David pointed that out last week, or last time, I should say, not last week. We then went off, if you recall, into a little conversation about censorship and self-censorship, why the rabbis took out some of the anti-Christian and anti-Roman stuff because they were frightened of being, and I think, Julia, you pointed that out, they were frightened of being punished for that. And then I spoke a little bit about what might be in the vaults of the Vatican, because it's said that there are uncensored versions of the Gemarah and manuscripts of the Gemarah in the vaults of the Vatican, and hopefully we'll hear a little bit more about that when my son Dan comes in January, because he's going to give us a share on that. It's one of his little quirky interests. So that word shmad does not exist in the Vilna Shas. But anyway, there was this gezerah, this decree against Israel, a very harsh decree. Shekol hasomech ye'erag. Anybody who gives smicha, who does the act of ordaining a rabbi, will be killed. V'chol hanismach ye'erag. And anybody who receives smicha will be killed. Ve'ir shesomchin ba techarev. And the city in which the smicha takes place will be destroyed. Utchumin shesomchim bahem ye'akru. And the Shabbat Tchum, the 2,000 Amot area around a city, that will be destroyed as well. Others say that the border markers marking the Tchum will be uprooted, but that doesn't really fit in. What it means is that the people living outside the city walls, but within the Tchum, will also be destroyed. A very harsh decree. And we also spoke last time about this sort of concentric living, that the rich people lived within the walls because they were given the protection of the walls, and the less rich people lived outside, and the poorer you were, the further away from the city centre you lived, because then you'd have to leg it to the walls further when you were attacked from outside. A little bit like it's gone full circle, hasn't it? When we were all kids, the rich people all moved out to the suburbs further away from the centre, but now it's gone back the other way. The rich people now live in fancy flats in the Azrieli building, or in whatever it is in London, the equivalent, or in number 1 Deansgate in Manchester. Why anybody on earth would want to live in the city centre is beyond me, but there you go. That's because I'm not in that generation. So that's what we spoke about last time. And where we left it was over here. Me asa Yehuda ben Bava. So what did he do, this Yehuda ben Bava, that was so good, that gave him this statement that if it weren't for him, all the fines, the laws of fines would have been forgotten or gone into disuse? Well, this is what he did. Halach, he went. Veyashav lo bein shnei harim gedolim. And he sat himself down between 2 mountains. Ubein shtei ayarot gedolot. And between 2 large cities. Uben shnei tchumei Shabbat, and in between 2 areas of tchum of Shabbat. Bein Usha lishfaram, between Usha and Shfaram, and he sat between these 2 places. Now, let's just imagine that you've got 2 cities. I'm going to use we're all English here, right? So I'm going to use Manchester and Liverpool as examples.
I knew you were going to say that,
because they're fairly close, and you've got 2 cities. Imagine you've got Manchester and you've got Greater Manchester, the Tchum of Manchester, and then you've got the M62, and you've got Liverpool, and you've got Greater Liverpool. And there's a gap between them. You haven't got Greater Liverpool, but you know what I mean. You've got the suburbs of Liverpool. It's not called Greater Liverpool. It's called Merseyside now. But you know what I mean. So you've got the area around Manchester, and we'll call that its Tchum. You've got the M62, and then you've got Liverpool with its Tchum, right? And so Rav Yehuda ben Bava, as it were, sat himself around about Warrington, right, in the middle of the M62.
I think he was in IKEA, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. He was probably sitting on an IKEA stool, which he got from Warrington. No other reason to go to Warrington other than the right IKEA. Or if you're like me, that's one place you would avoid at all costs. So anyway, he sat between these 2 large cities, outside of the tchumim of each city, in between the 2 of them. And he sat there outside IKEA on his IKEA stool, and samach sham chamisha zakenim, and he sat there giving out smicha, and he gave smicha to 5 very senior people, so senior that the Gemara sees fit to mention them, and they are so senior that all of them, except for one, is only just given their first name because they're so famous. Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua. We have to use Rabbi Elazar ben Shamua's second name, ben Shamua, because there's another very famous Rabbi Elazar who we come across in the Haggadah, and who might that be?
Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah.
Correct, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, who at the age of 18 looked like an old man because he had the responsibility of the entire community. I know how he feels. So you've got these 5 senior rabbis being given smicha in the middle of these places. in between Usha and Shfaram. So let me show you where Usha and Shfaram are, because I'm sure you'd like to know that. And I have got it ready for you. If I can just find it on my thing. Where did I find it? There it is. Hang on. Here it comes. You got the screen with a map? Okay, so there's Usha, and there's Shefa Amar. That is today an Arab village. I'll just scroll out so you can see where it is. It's due east of Haifa. There's Haifa, and there is Usha, and there is Shefa Amar or Shefaram. Now, if you were to go the long way round on Route 70, it's 15.4 kilometers. So you can see that as the crow flies, it's probably half of that, isn't it? It doesn't look to be more than, what, 7 or 8 kilometers. If that's 15.4, that blue line, and the gray line over there is 16.1, as the crow flies, that's probably, I would guess, probably about 7 or 8 kilometers max. So that's Usha, and that's Shfaram. Now,
and there's here exactly between the two, yeah?
Say that again, David?
There's an IKEA branch exactly between the two.
I'm sure there is, yes. On a hill
actually
somewhere.
Quite funny, because I think yesterday my daughter said to me that my grandson is at Bnei Akiva camp somewhere up north, and they've got a grandparents' day on Friday. Did we want to go? And I'm sure she said it was at Usha.
Well, there you are. It may well be. Let's have a look and see what we'll have a look and see what Usha has got to offer then, shall we? Let's have a look. It's a kibbutz, apparently. There we go. And it is kibbutz Usha in the Western Galilee, located near the city of Kiryat Atta. It's got a population of 533. There it is. Usha is in there. Anyway, if we go back to the map, that is where he says, now, what was he doing up there in the Western Galilee? What was Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava doing up there? Where was the main seat of learning at that time?
In Tiberia.
Yavne.
No, it had moved from Yavne. Yavne is down here. Yavne is down here, near, not far from about northeast of Yerushalayim, way down here. That's where Yavne is. There's Jerusalem. Yavne is around about here. So no, it moved from Yavne. It started in Yavne, you're right, because Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said, Ten li Yavne v'chachameha. Give me Yavne and its sages. And that is where they all ran off to at the time of the destruction. But after that, in the 2nd century CE, it had moved up to this place. Can you see that? I'll just scroll in a bit for you. See that there? Tzipori. Anybody been to Tzipori? Yes. Okay, Marcel, what did you see at Tzipori? Unmute yourself and tell us what you saw in Tzipori.
A very well preserved Roman town. It's a very, very worthwhile place to visit. They have it's a preserved plus replica Mishnaic village, they call it, and it is a village which is a replica of how things were, how they lived at the time of the Mishnah. And it's in Tzipori, and as you can see, it's in Tzipori National Park. It's a beautiful place. You've got Ya'ar Tzipori, which is Tzipori Forest here. It's a beautiful, beautiful place to visit and really interesting. Tzipori is a very well preserved and well put together place. You should definitely go there if you've never been before. We went on a tiyul up there once, didn't we, with the shul, and it will be somewhere I would definitely go again. I've been a couple of times. A great place to take the kids as well if you've got grandchildren of sort of teenage age or a bit younger, to show them how they lived in the times of the Mishnah. It's very, very, very worthwhile visit. Now, as you can see, if I scroll out, you can see that Tzipori is not very far from Usha, and therefore will not be very far from Shafaram. It's only 28 kilometers on that route to Usha. So the answer to my question, what he was doing up there, is that's where all the big rabbis of the time were based, in the Galil. That's where the Mishnah and the discussions that are recorded in the Mishnah, or many of the discussions that are recorded in the Mishnah, took place in this area, in the Western Galil. And it's a very, very nice place. By the way, yesterday I was up in this place here, Ma'alot Tarshia, and I was at a place called Chosen, which is another beautiful place. And I was at a Nachal there, absolutely gorgeous up there. Those of you that have never been up to a tour in the north, it's very, very well worthwhile. But here is definitely somewhere to visit, Tzipori, and that's where the Sanhedrin was based in the 2nd century. So let's go back to the Gemarah. That's a bit of background. Let's go back to the Gemarah. Stop that share. There we go. You got the Gemarah again now, yeah? Okay. So he sat between these. Now, next question is, why did he go to IKEA in the middle of the M62? What was he doing in these two places? Why did he do that? Well, it's obvious, isn't it? Because the Gezerah, the decree was that any city where a smicha took place, the whole city would be destroyed. And not only that, the tchum around that city, Greater Manchester or Merseyside, would have all been destroyed had he been in those places. So in order to prevent that happening, in case he got caught, which he was, as you'll see in a minute, he went and sat in between two cities. So no city would be implicated or caught up in the decree which we read about over here, Gazra Malchut Rasha Shmal al Yisrael, Shekol HaSomech Yerev V'chol HaNizbaron, the Ir Shesomchim B'Atei Charev, and the city in which it took place would be destroyed. Utchumin Shesomchim B'Hen Ye'akru. So, because of that Gezerah, he then said, okay, well, I'm not going to take any notice of this Gezerah. I'm going to do my ordination, but I'm not going to endanger the cities, and I'll do it in between the cities. And that's what he did. And then we hear who these 5 students were, very, very famous students who we read of multiple times in the Mishnah and the Gemarah. Rabbi Meir, probably the most famous of all of them, because he is the assumed author of any opinion which doesn't have a name. So anytime that the Mishnah says an opinion without giving a name of who it is assumed to be Rabbi Meir. So very, very important figures. And from them, of course, from those 5, there were further ordinations that went on. One of whom we're going to read about shortly was Rabbi Akiva. And we know, don't we, that Rabbi Akiva had a number of students. How many students did he have at least?
5,000, was it?
No, more than 5,000.
24,000.
How do you know that, Michael?
Because you've told us before.
Okay, well, that's a fair answer. We know that because we learn about the reasons that we have this semi-mourning period during Sfirat HaOmer is because the Talmidim, the pupils of Rabbi Akiva, died during that period. The Gemara says they died because they didn't give respect to one another. And the figure given is 24,000 students died. I think that figure is not to be taken literally, but it is taken literally by many. The other angle to that, of course, is that many more modern scholars believe that those 24,000 students, or however many they were, died fighting in the Bar Kokhba rebellion, because Rabbi Akiva was a supporter of Bar Kokhba, and he would have encouraged all of his students to sign up to Bar Kokhba's army. And of course, when they were finally wiped out at Beitar, they would have died at that time. So the answer to the question is 24,000, Michael. You're quite right, and I have told you that before, so well done for that. And the reason that we know that is because of the Sfirat HaOmer. So I'm coming to you in a sec, Leon. But the point that I want to make is that these 5 didn't just stop at 5. All of these 5 would also have had, just like Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was the next generation. He was given smicha apparently by Rabbi Meir, who's mentioned here. Although there's a machlokas about that in the Gemara in a minute, which we'll see. So each one of them would have, expanded their pool of students and given out smicha. And so therefore, as a result of Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava's bravery and courage in sitting between Usha and Shfaram and giving out smicha to these 5 rabbis, as a result of that, many, many more rabbis were ordained in the future. And as a result of that, the laws of fines were not forgotten. So now we understand why the Gemara said at the end of the previous page over here, that il mole, if it were not for him, nishtakhu dinei knasot miYisrael, the laws of fines would have gone into disuse if it were not for him. Why? Because he was the one that initiated all the smicha to allow rabbis to adjudicate fines. So he gets the credit for being like the granddaddy of smicha in that generation, against all odds, because nobody else had the courage to go against the gezerah, the decree of the Romans. Leon, you have been, one sec, Julie, Leon's been patiently waiting, then we'll come to you. Yes, Leon.
I was going to ask whether the setting up of this meeting between the 2 cities was not just for granting smicha to the people who were deserving of it. Would they take students there as well to teach Gemarah and to teach the laws?
I suspect that they were not alone. And the reason I think that is because, as I know that you've read the story, you know what happens next. And if you read the story, which we will in a minute, it seems to me that this was quite a big deal. That, although obviously it was probably done in secret to a degree so as not to alert the Romans to what they were up to. I suspect that this was, something which was a bit of a big deal, and there would have been other students there as well, watching on, or maybe even getting smicha as well. Who knows? But I think you're right, because we'll read the next bit of the Gemara in a minute, and we'll see what actually happened. So I think they weren't alone. That's how it reads to me, anyway. Yes, Julia.
I was just wondering why it would be limited to the law of fines that would have been forgotten, and whether surely there may have been other laws that would have been forgotten if there were no Rabbonim.
The reason that they've said that in the Gemara is as a result of the previous piece of Gemara, which is over here, and we'll just do it again so that it's in context. Amalei Rav Acha Bereda Rava Rav Ashi. Rav Acha, the son of Rava, said to Rav Ashi, Bidam mamash samchin le. Do they really lean on them with their hands when they give smicha? Because as we know, smicha means to lean. Amalein, he says to him, samchin le bishma. No, they don't do smicha with their hands. They do it by name. Kari le Rebbe. They call him Rebbe. They give him the title Rabbi. Vayahave le reshuta lemeidan dinei knasot. And they give him permission then to adjudicate the laws of fines. So it seems from here that you didn't need to be an ordained rabbi to adjudicate certain matters, but in order to do matters of fines, then you had to be an ordained rabbi. So in other words, you could constitute a sort of what we call bet din hedyot, a bet din like we do on Erev Yom Kippur to do the annulment of vows. We get 3 ordinary folk and we sit them down and we appoint them as judges temporarily, and they can do what they need to do to symbolically release people from their vows. You don't need to be an ordained rabbi, apparently, to give an opinion, let's say, on something of kashrut. If you're just somebody who's knowledgeable, and the person that's asking you thinks you are knowledgeable enough to answer the question, you can answer the question. But when it comes to fines, and of course that makes sense, doesn't it? You can't have any Tom, Dick, or Harry giving out fines. It has to be somebody official, who the bet din or the court says you have to abide by this person's.
Yes, but there are other penalties, death penalty, corporal punishment, that surely.
Those we know already from previous Gemaras, don't we? That we need 23 for certain things. We need 71 for certain things, and these are judges, ordained judges. This is the sort of local magistrates' court, really. Parking fines kind of thing. So I think that and this is why this was so important, because every small town would have had its own little bet din, to make sure that the wheels of society ran smoothly. And of course, you need your what's the word, deterrence, which includes fines. And so it was very, very important that people were given smicha, and then they went off to their little villages to adjudicate. So it's a bit like, appointing a magistrate or to a court. You can't have a court without magistrates, and the magistrate has to be appointed by somebody, and they have to be an appropriate person, and you have to go through a certain amount of training, I imagine, and etc. So I think they're concentrating on fines because, if you like, that's the lowest level of justice that is required for society to work correctly in various little shtetl around the country. So that's why they mentioned fines. But you're right. If in practice, you're right. Had there not been ordination, then sooner or later, there wouldn't have been any teachers, because generally speaking, the people who got ordination were the people who were the scholars. So, and whilst you do have many scholars who are not ordained, if there was no such thing as ordination, I think sooner or later that would have all fallen apart. So I'm sure that in practice you're right, but in principle, the reason that they're specifically mentioning fines is so that the society can run in an ordered way. Okay, that was a good question, actually. It was an interesting question. Right, so that's what he did. Let's go back to where we're up to. Rav Avia Mosif. Rav Avia adds that Rabbi Nehemiah, another student, was amongst those who was ordained. Now, why have they brought this story? Apart from the fact that it's an interesting story, what was our original question? Our original question was, do you need 3 people to give smicha? Which is what we said in the first place, if you remember, all the way back up here. There we go. See our little S sign there? Tana, smicha or smichat zekenim bishlosha. The smicha, which was the laying of the hands of the animal, if you remember, we learned this a month or so ago. The animal that was brought when there was a communal sin needed to be atoned for. And smichat zekenim, which is the ordination of rabbis, bishlosha, needs 3 people, needs 3 dayanim, 3 rabbis. So that was our statement in the Breita there. So the Gemara asked the question, is that true? Do we really need 3? And that's why they brought the story of Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, because the story is that he sat in between Usha and Shfaram. Doesn't say that he sat with his beis din, doesn't say that he sat with anybody else. It says that he, the great Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, sat there and gave out smicha. So that's a proof, says the Gemara. Oh, look, we've got a picture here. Didn't know that. Didn't even need to go onto Google Maps. Could have just looked in the Steinsaltz. There it is. Usha and Shafaram. It's not quite as good as the Google Maps thing. It doesn't give you the route to get there, but it gives you an idea of where it is. Thank you for that, Rabbi Steinsaltz. What does he say over here? Usha was a city in the Lower Galilee, which served for a period of time as the seat of the Sanhedrin. There you are. From Usha, the Sanhedrin moved to Shafaram, a town in the nearby Zvulun Valley. These 2 locations were separated by about 2 miles. 2 miles of mountainous terrain. What did I say? I said about 7 kilometers. 2 miles is what? What's 2 miles in kilometers? It's about 3.5. So I was a little bit out on there. According to tradition, the cave of Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava is located between these places where there is a Greek inscription demarking the Sabbath boundary, the Tchum from Usha. Fascinating. Thank you for that. Okay, so where were we? What were we talking about? We were talking about, yes, so we said that proves that you only need 1 rabbi to do ordination, not 3. So how do we fit that in with our Brisa? Our Brisa said you need 3. I mean, it couldn't be any clearer, could it? Smichat zekenim bishlosha. So how are we going to deal with that? So before we go on and have a look at the rest of the story, which comes next on what happened to Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. Oh, hello, Michael. Nice of you to join.
It's taken me half an hour to boot up the laptop.
Oh, okay. Well, we're talking about smicha, and we're talking about a man called Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, who ordained 5 or 6 very, very special rabbis against the decree of the Romans. And the Gemara is asking the question now. It seems that he gave this smicha out on his own, whereas we had a Breita, which is a Mishnaic discussion, which said that we needed 3 rabbis to give out smicha. So the question I just asked just before you joined was how come Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava could do it on his own if they needed 3, if the Braita says they needed 3. And before we just see what happened to Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, because he ended up meeting a sticky end, we'll read that in a second. Who would like to suggest a get-out clause for the Gemara as to how come we can square Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava giving out smicha with the Braita that says there has to be 3?
It was very dangerous to have too many people around, so therefore he did it on his own, even though maybe he shouldn't have.
Okay, so that's very true. It was dangerous. So are you saying, Michael, that these smichas were not valid? Or are you saying that they made a special exception because it was dangerous and therefore they suspended the rule that they needed 3? Or both?
Maybe he shouldn't have done it, but the fact that he had done it didn't make it illegal, like we've had it elsewhere, something like that.
Okay, all right. So Michael's suggestion is that lechatchila, in the first instance, he shouldn't have done it, but having done it, b'diavad, it works. Okay, Marcel, what have you got to say?
Was it perhaps because he wanted to confuse the Romans, and that it wasn't valid what he did?
Okay, so if it wasn't valid what he did, how come Rebbe Meir gets the title Rebbe? Did he get a smicha somewhere else as well? Maybe. Okay, any other suggestions? Julia, do you have a suggestion?
Not really. I just thought it would be suspended in the case of emergency.
Okay,
I mean,
suspended in
we
the
have
case
all
of emergency.
sorts of get-outs in the religion for, like the Shabbat rules that can be broken in emergencies. So
Okay,
it's not
this was what Julia's describing there is known as a horat sha'ah, a law, a ruling of sha'ah. What does the word sha'ah mean?
Oh.
An hour. That's right. Horat sha'ah means it's a ruling for a specific time only, for a specific hour. In other words, a one-off thing. Now, the most famous machloket, which affects us today, when I say today, I mean today, this very day, of a horat sha'ah is what? Who can read my mind and knows what I'm talking? Shemitah. Very good, Michael. Shemitah. The takana of, or the halacha, the ruling of Rav Kook, which actually wasn't his ruling originally, but the ruling of that Rav Kook became famous for, which is the heter mechira, which I suspect that most of us rely on, and that is in Shemitah, you're not allowed to do any kind of commercial commercial something action, some commercial. Anyway, so any kind of commercial thing, can't think of the word, with Shemitah produce. Transaction, thank you, transaction. You can't do any commercial transaction. That's a sign of age. The word ran away from me. By the way, that's a Hebrew expression, barachli. It ran away from me. So you can't do any commercial transaction with produce grown on Jewish land in the Shemitah year. So one of the get-out clauses is that the heter mechira, you're given permission to sell the land for the period of Shemitah, a bit like selling your chametz before Pesach. You sell the land before Shemitah to a non-Jew, and then the produce that comes from that land is no longer subject to the laws of Shemitah. And so therefore you can do commercial transactions, and you can buy it in the supermarket. If you go into most of the supermarkets, with the exception of Osher Ad, you will see the hechsher there in the vegetable section. If you read it carefully, you'll see Yes, Julia, you're muted. So if you're going to say something, you need to unmute. Go on.
I wasn't going to say anything except, ooh, that I didn't know that Osher Ad was an exception.
Yes, if you're going to Osher Ad, there are sections there where I think there is a Heter Mechira section as well. I'm not sure. But Osher Ad definitely has Shemitah vegetables available, and you've got to be careful with those in terms of Kedusha. But most of the supermarkets have Heter Mechira produce, and there'll be a Tu'udah telling you that. Now, what's that got to do with us? There are many people, most particularly the Charedim, who don't accept the Heter Mechira. And the reason for that is, well, first of all, they don't accept Rav Kook's rulings on anything, but they don't accept that this, even if they accepted it for then, they say it was a Hora'at Sha'ah. It was a temporary ruling, because at that time in the early part of the 20th century, people were starving. If they didn't eat the produce of what they'd grown in their own land, they wouldn't be able to survive. They'd die of hunger. And so therefore, the rabbis allowed this get-out clause just temporarily for that time. There are other people who say, no, it was not a Horat Sha'ah, and we can still rely on the Heter Mechira. And that is a very, very fiery machlokes, which still goes on to this very day. And there are many people who will not, under any circumstances, eat Heter Mechira produce. Life is difficult here in Israel if you don't eat Heter Mechira produce. But it can be done, but it's difficult. So, Horat Sha'ah. So, what Julia's suggesting, and Michael also suggested it, was that this might have been a Horat Sha'ah, that he was allowed to give smicha on his own because of the danger. If he didn't give smicha, what would happen? No rabbis, and then we'd lose all the laws of fines. And we've already said what a great guy he was, that he gets this great credit for, if it weren't for him, these laws of fines would have been forgotten throughout Israel. And that's a great zechut for him. By the way, he's known, Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava is known by another title. He's known as Rabbi Yehuda HaChasid, the pious. So he was definitely a top draw guy, and he made it into the top 10 of the Eila Ezkara. So, we're dealing with top draws here. So there is another explanation, which Leon will tell us now, because he's read on. Go on, Leon, what's another explanation?
Well, in one word, it's covered. He was so superior to the people, the Rabbanim around him, that even to mention the names of the two people who were with him granting smicha would lower the estimation of the people. So it was covered to him, not to me.
Leon is told us what the Gemarah is about to tell us, and that is that he wasn't on his own. Only he had two other people with him. Only he was so great that the other two weren't even worthy of a mention. Didn't even rate a mention with him. And so you thought that he was on his own because it says so. Well, it doesn't say he was on his own, but it doesn't say he had anyone with him. It doesn't say he was on his own either. We made an assumption, didn't we, that he was on his own. And the Gemarah tells us, don't make any assumptions. He wasn't on his own. He had two other people with him. Only he was so much greater than anyone else that they didn't even rate a mention. So that's what the Gemarah is going to say. Let's learn it inside now, because we're going to learn what happened to Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. If you've got a Gemarah in front of you, Michael, it's on Daf Yud Dalad Amud Aleph 14a. If not, you've got it on the screen here.
Yes.
So there he is, Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, sitting in the middle of Usha and Shfaram on his IKEA stool. Inevitably, the Romans found them. When the enemies, i.e. the Romans, found them, shehikiru, they recognized them, they discovered them. Amar lahen, he said to them, who said to who? Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava said to these new rabbis, these 5 or 6, depending on which opinion you go by, Banai, my children, Rutsu, get out of here, run for your lives. The Romans are upon us. Amrulo, they said to him, Rebbe, Matahe Alecha, what will happen to you? If we run, what's going to happen to you? He was an elderly man by this time. Apologies to those who are over this age, but he was about 70, and he was reckoned to be an elderly man. Amalahen, he said to them, Hareini mutal lifnehem ke'even she'ein la hofchim. He said to them, I am cast before them like a stone that cannot be overturned. And Rav Steinsaltz has given us a bit of help here. What he meant was, even if you attempt to assist me, I will not be able to escape due to my frailty. But if you do not escape with me, you will also be killed. So, in other words, he says, I'm a goner. So, makes no difference for me. I'm a goner. Save your own lives, run for it, and leave me here. Another aspect of his heroism there that we see. And he says, Hareini mutalif nehem, I am before them ke'even, like a stone, she'ein la hofchim. I will not be turned over. In other words, they will not move me from here. In other words, they'll have to kill me to take me out of here, which is exactly what they did. Amru, it was said, Lo zazu misham, the Roman soldiers, there they are on the right-hand side with their spears. You can just see that picture there. If I make it a bit bigger, you might be able to see it a bit better. Let's have a look. You can see the Roman soldiers with their spears. They said to him, it was said about them, Lo zazumi sham. They didn't move from this area. They didn't move from this place that they were between Usha and Shfaram. Ad shena'atzubo shlosh meot lunchiot shel barzel, until they had stabbed him with 300 iron daggers or spears. Va'asahu kichvara, and they made him like a sieve. That is how poor Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava ended up coming to a sticky end. He was one of the 10 Harugei Malchut, one of the 10 martyrs. The poem that we referred to in the Machzor, which this year you will not fall asleep through now because you're going to read it very carefully. The story that we read in there has a great deal of literary license because it's not accurate. All 10 of those people, if you read the story, it reads as if like one were taken after the other, after the other, after the other. And it's not the case. Some of them didn't even live contemporaneously. And of course, Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava was speared to death away from the madding crowd, as it were, in his IKEA stool between Usha and Shfaram. So he was on his own when he was killed. So the Eila Ezkara poem is a poem, it's poetic license. These 10 people were killed by the Romans, and they were killed in a very unpleasant and nasty way, but not necessarily literally as detailed in the poem. So this is what they were doing. This is what happened to him. Let's quickly just do what we've said here about the fact that somebody were with him. So they said, there you are, that's a proof that one person can give smicha. Yes, Julia.
Sorry, I was just going to say it's not really relevant, but he didn't die till he was 90, according to Rav Steinsaltz.
Who, Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I read that he was.
He lived a very long life, reaching 90 years or more at the time of his death.
Okay, that's interesting. I didn't read that. I read that he was 70, but I may have read that he was 70 at another point. Don't know. Yes, David?
Yeah, I tell you where you got 70 from. The other version of the Asara Harugei Malchut we read Sunday a week ago on Tisha B'Av, called Arazei Halavanon, and in there where he's actually listed at number 6 instead of number 10, the Paitan, whoever it was, says he was 70 years old when he was murdered by the Romans in this way.
There you go. So I didn't make it up. Thank you, David. Shows what attention I must have been paying on Tisha B'Av. So there you go. A little tick for me. Okay, so he was either 70 or 90, depending on which version you want to take. We'll take the 90 version, right? So he was an old man. Anyway, let's go just finish off this little bit of Gemarah, and that he was not on his own. Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava acharini hava v'hadei. There were other sages performing the ordination with him, who were added on to reach the quota of the 3 sages. V'hai de la chashivlei mishum kvodo to Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. The way Leon said it, and the reason that they weren't mentioned is that they were very significantly inferior to Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, and they didn't rate a mention with him because of his kavod. So there we go. That's where we will stop. We did today the story of Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava. We looked at where Usha and Shfaram are. We looked at where Tzipori is, which is about over here. We also spoke about the idea that he sat himself between 2 places so that the places and Tchumim would not be implicated in his crime, inverted commas. And the Gemara asked the question to say, is that not a proof that you only need 1 rabbi? And the answer is no, because he had 2 other people with him, only they were noch schleppers. And we also spoke about the idea of a hora'at sha'ah, a ruling which was an emergency ruling, which we could quite easily have put forward as an explanation as to why he was on his own. And the example that we gave of a hora'at sha'ah in our modern times is that of the heter mechira. And that's where we will leave it for today. Any further questions or comments? Next week we will have a question. We'll start with a question of who gave Rabbi Meir smicha. Rabbi Meir, the famous Rabbi Meir, who is the author of so many halachot. Who gave him smicha? It seems to be a matter of dispute, and we will start with that next time. Any questions or comments?
Yes, Johnny. Just a small thing. In a footnote, it refers to something by Rambam. I understand it's number 6. Rambam Hill, and it said Sanhedrin 4:3. I don't follow that.
Okay, that is in the Rambam's Hilchot Sanhedrin. It's part of the Mishnah Torah that the Rambam wrote. One of the chapters is called Hilchot Sanhedrin.
Right.
One of the sections, I should say. And in Hilchot Sanhedrin, chapter 4, if 3, clause 3, you will see. I'll have a look and see what it says, but that's what it's referring to. It's not referring to the Gemarah Sanhedrin.
No.
It's referring to Hilchot Sanhedrin, part of Mishnah Torah of the Rambam.
Right. Thank you.
That's the shape of cup.
Any other questions or comments?
The shape of cup I have now.
Okay, in that case, I will wish you a fond farewell and have a good rest of the week, and Shabbat Shalom when it comes along.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Johnny.
It was really good.
Good. Glad you enjoyed it.
Thank you, Johnny.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.